Lazo. I'm the chair of the Land Conservation and Development Commission. Today is Thursday, April 23rd, 2026, and I call this meeting to order. We'd like to recognize the administrative and information technology staff without whom this meeting would not be possible. They are John Dunsmore, Ingrid Cadell, Brandy Elmer, Jess Miller, James Kolpovich, and our commission assistant, Denise Johnson. Thank you all for the work that you do to support the meetings. Denise, could you please continue our meeting?
Good morning, Chair Lazo, Vice Chair Boyer, commissioners, guests, and staff. Thank you for joining us on day one of the Land Conservation and Development Commission's April 2026 LCDC meeting. For the record, my name is Denise Johnson, Commission Assistant for the Land Conservation and Development Commission. Before we begin, I'll make note of a few things. Let me get my screen pulled up. Recordings of the commission's meetings are available on YouTube. For those individuals joining us via Zoom, please use the public comment sign-up form on our website. While 3 minutes for public testimony is typical, the chair may reduce the time according to the number of people signed up to testify and other schedule demands. Zoom participants, please rename yourselves with your first and last name so that we can identify you and bring you forward at your opportunity to speak. Zoom participants will be in listen-only mode until called upon to testify. Commissioners, to promote audio clarity, please speak directly into the microphones during discussions. Again, we thank you for being here with us today. Chair Lazo, the meeting is yours.
Thank you, Denise. Will you please call the roll?
Commissioner Bennett?
Present.
Commissioner Porter?
Present.
Commissioner Thompson?
Present.
Commissioner Warren is absent. Vice Chair Boyer?
Present.
And Chair Lazo.
Present. Thank you, Denise. The land acknowledgement will now be presented by Commissioner Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say that this is personal because this is family for me as well. It adds a layer of sweetness to this. Indigenous tribes and bands have been with the lands that we inhabit today throughout Oregon and the Northwest since time immemorial and continue to be a vibrant part of Oregon today. We would like to express our respect to the First Peoples of this land, the 9 federally recognized tribes of Oregon: Burns Paiute Tribe, Confederated Tribes of Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Siuslaw Indians, Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians, Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, Confederated Tribes of the Warm Springs Reservation, Coquel Indian Tribe, Cow Creek Band of the Umpqua Tribe of Indians, and the Klamath Tribes. It is important that we recognize and honor the ongoing legal and spiritual relationship between the land, plants, animals, and people indigenous to this place we now call Oregon. The interconnectedness of the people, the land, and the natural environment cannot be overstated. The health of one is necessary for the health of all. We recognize the pre-existing and continued sovereignty of the 9 federally recognized tribes who have ties to this place and thank them for continuing to share their traditional ecological knowledge and perspective on how we might care for one another and the land so that it can take care of us. We commit to engaging in a respectful and successful partnership as stewards of these lands. And as we are obliged by state law and policy, we will uphold government-to-government relations to advance strong governance outcomes supportive of tribal self-determination and sovereignty. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Thompson. We'll now approve these agenda for these meetings of our 2 days. Are there any proposed changes to the agenda? Director Bateman, do you have anything that you want to add to the agenda? Thank you. If there are no proposed changes, the agenda then is adopted for our 2 days today. All right, introductions. Commissioners, please introduce yourself and the region that you are appointed from. And why don't we start at the end of the dais down there?
Here, my name is Ellen Porter, and I represent Southern Oregon, including Douglas, Josephine, and Jackson counties. Thank you.
Good morning, Mark Bennett. I represent the 18 counties east of the Cascades. I was thinking, you said your 2 counties. I guess I could start, or 3 counties. I'll skip listing off all 18, but I proudly represent all of them.
That might be a good test for you sometime, Commissioner.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Leanne Thompson. I'm the coastal commissioner from the upper left edge to the California state line.
Morning, Barbara Boyer, representing Northern Willamette Valley.
I'm Alan Lazo. I'm appointed from the Portland Metropolitan Region.
Good morning, Commissioners. Brenda Bateman, Director of the Department of Land Conservation and Development. And I just wanted to note that I'll be stepping out early tomorrow morning. Kirsten Green, our deputy, will be covering for me for the first 2 agenda items, while I am meeting in person with the Governor's Data Center Advisory Committee.
Hi, and I'm Steve Shipsey. I'm counsel to the commission, and I represent 36 counties. Sand.
And council will ask you to name those as a test sometime also then.
That'll be a bring your child to work activity in
Exactly.
the county on the,
Important civics
on
work.
the state map.
Good morning, Kirsten Green, Deputy Director and Tribal Liaison.
I know that we're a little bit ahead and we're going to maybe pause for a moment to wait for Matt to crawl on agenda item 3, the rulemaking transportation planning rule initiation. So we'll give Matt, who I think is introducing the agency to our guest today. So we'll give ourselves a moment. Yes, actually I would.
Denise Johnson, Commission Assistant.
Ingrid Codell, Admin Assistant to the Housing Team.
I think we can do, when do we do the staff that is joined us here in the room today?
Josh Hardage, Chief Operating Officer.
Please.
Commissioners, if I may, I just wanted to introduce a little bit of what else is going on in the building today and the reason that Matt has not joined us in the room yet. Today is Take Your Kids to Work Day. And so for the first time in a long time, maybe ever, DLCD is hosting a number of our employees, our staff's kids. We have more than 20 young people in the building with us today, mostly ages 10 and up. And so Matt is giving them some introductory comments about who we are and what we do. We have a lot of activities planned for them today, including a tour of the Capitol and then lunch with you at the commission. They'll be spending some time with us in a meal and a little bit of a hands-on activity. We're going to be, just a preview, we're going to be using the book Dream, Play, Build. That is a different technique that planners often use to connect with their communities and ask them questions about their vision for the future and what they want to see for their own neighborhoods. Rather than just talking, they'll get a chance to use their hands, and so will you, to build some of your favorite childhood memories. So that'll be the basis of our lunchtime activity today. We're very excited about it, and we'll be meeting across the hall with the kids later this morning.
And we have an extended lunchtime to do that activity today. So it'll be fantastic to spend some time with tomorrow's planners. And Matt, is here now. So if we're a couple minutes ahead, but let's go ahead and move to Item number 3, the rulemaking for the transportation planning rule, initiation of that rulemaking. Welcome. Matt, if you're all ready, why don't you go ahead and introduce your team?
Good morning, Chair Lazo, Vice Chair Boyer, and Commissioners. I am Matt Kroll, Planning Services Division Manager here at the department. Apologies for being just a little late. I was meeting with the youth. We've got a good group, I think 14, 15 of them, ages from about 4th grade through senior in high school. And I had 20 minutes, so I tried to give them the whole land use planning system. They might still have a few questions for you at lunchtime, though. There may have been a few points that I had to gloss over in that time, but I think it was interesting. With me today.
Good morning, Bill Holmstrom, Land Use and Transportation Planning Coordinator.
Before we get into the detail, I just want to frame it up a little bit and just think about this. We're talking about the transportation planning rules, and they're really about integrating land use and transportation, which is why they come to you and not to the Oregon Transportation Commission. I think we work with the Department of Transportation a lot and with their commission sometimes, but these are about integrating the land use, which is why it's here. They were initially adopted back in 1991, been amended a lot of times since then, and it's a lot about increasing choices. That's really the thread or the theme that runs through all of the transportation planning rules, is trying to keep those choices there. But today we're talking about sort of a subset of the rules, which is that apply in the metropolitan areas, and that really are aimed at increasing equity, both in the process of the transportation planning and in the outcomes, the equity, and addressing reducing pollution that is disrupting our climate. And so that's a really important issue, I think, there. What we're proposing today is not a major policy making on those issues. I think you have, and the legislature and the governor have settled a lot of those big policy issues about working on this. It's a more limited scope, and we'll go over the specifics of that, but here, that's what we're recommending to you. And so we're here today to talk about that scope and get any feedback you have on that. We're not asking you for final decisions or adopting any rules today, but any thoughts that you have if we are too narrow, too wide, or looking at the wrong things or the right things. That's the kind of feedback we're hoping to get from you today. So with that, I think, Bill, if you want to take us into some of the details here.
Yeah, thank you very much, Matt. Again, Bill Holmstrom, Land Use and Transportation Planning Coordinator. Thank you, Chair Lazo, Vice Chair Boyer, and members of the Commission. Like Matt said, we're going to be talking mostly of the rules that we're changing are in Division 12, or what we call the TPR, the Transportation Planning Rules. We are going to be proposing also a change to Division 44, what we call the Metropolitan Greenhouse Gas Reduction Target Rules. It's very closely connected to how land use and transportation work in metropolitan areas. So I'll touch on that a little bit later when we get there, but I just want to be clear that we are making a change, proposing a change in that division as well. And I'll try to be clear about, it is confusing when we talk about, start throwing around Division 12, Division 44, and try to be clear about that when I get there. So I'm going to go a little bit about the background of how we got where we are now, get into the details of our proposed scope of the rulemaking, and then I'll talk a little bit about the proposed rulemaking process that we'll undertake here. So like Matt said, the Commission adopted significant updates to the transportation planning rules, as well as like I said, Division 44 and Division 8 as well, having to do with housing. Back in the process went through 2020 through 2023, or 2022, and then there was another set of amendments in 2023. These rules all applied to the state's 8 metropolitan areas, which are on this map on the screen: the Portland metropolitan area, Salem-Keizer area, the Albany area, the Corvallis area, Central Lane, which is Eugene Springfield, Bend, the Middle Rogue, which is the Grants Pass area, and then the Rogue Valley, which is Medford, Ashland, Central Point, that area. So almost all the things we're talking about today are really changes to rules that apply in these areas. There are a few very little changes where we talk about later that may apply statewide, but it's really little stuff. Just a real quick update on how we've been doing since these rules have been updated. One of the requirements was that a number of jurisdictions will need to designate what we call climate-friendly areas. So far, 6 cities that are required to do that have done that, and we are working with the other ones that are still working on doing that. continue moving that forward. So great progress there. 28 cities, it says reformed parking. What the rules require essentially is that local jurisdictions remove any mandates for off-street parking. And there's an option for them if they don't want to go do that whole thing, they can do some other things instead of that. But most cities have, of those 28, have just taken parking requirements, off-street parking requirements off the books. That's important, not just from the transportation point of view, but from a land use point of view. We're saving land that we were setting aside to store cars, to use more productively, to house people, to have open space, to have other businesses and services, other land development, instead of just excessive, in many cases, parking requirements. I want to be real clear that if you remove parking requirements, you aren't necessarily saying to someone who wants to develop property that you can't build parking there. And in most cases, folks still do build parking. So it's a matter of how much the government is telling you you have to build. That's been very successful. We have 2 scenario plans that have been submitted, which is the number that we're supposed to have submitted by now. Just remind the commission that a scenario plan was submitted by the Portland metropolitan area over a decade ago at this point. And that was the only one that was required at that time. At the time that we adopted these updates a few years ago, we were also required the next largest metropolitan areas in the state, the Salem, Kaiser, and the Central Lane, the Eugene, Springfield areas, to submit plans, and those have been submitted as well and are in the process of review. And then we have a number of local jurisdictions that are in the process of updating their transportation system plans. We're working closely with Department of Transportation on funding and supporting those transportation system plans updates. In terms of the plans that are, so there's a number of jurisdictions that may be working on them independently, but in terms of the plans that ODOT is supporting and funding, 4 of those have been contracted, and some of those are scheduled kind of back behind those first 4. So, and then there's some other jurisdictions that, like I said, are working independently on those that aren't even listed here. Any questions about that? Yes, Vice Chair.
Yeah.
Thank you, Barbara Boyer. So the 2 scenario plans submitted, it originally was just Metro. Is that what I understand? How many more are underneath the new lens?
Chair Lazo, Vice Chair Boyer, it's just these 2 that the rules require to adopt a scenario plan. The other 5 metropolitan areas are doing other work having to do with performance standards or performance measures that are laid out in the rule, and they're developing targets for those, but it's not a full-blown scenario plan process. It's a little bit lighter touch.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. For the cities that have already developed their plans, I guess it sounds like many jurisdictions are in various stages of their development. Do we know what it's costing those jurisdictions to comply with this, to get these plans together? I know I should have given you a heads up yesterday with that question, but it just came to mind.
Chair Lazo, Commissioner Porter, they're kind of all over the map. So I want to be real clear. Local jurisdictions have to have and have had transportation system plans, and will continue to have them and update them. Just the question is, what are the rules that are in place now versus what were in place before? So it's a little hard to disentangle what the costs of the new rules are versus just what the state of the practice is and what consultants are charging these days, because prices, even outside of metropolitan areas, have gone up quite a bit. So I don't know that even a smaller jurisdiction outside of metropolitan area is really under $200,000 these days for a large scale kind of TSP update. For the larger jurisdictions, and this is again even before the metropolitan area, before the updated rules, we're starting to push $1 million for a large scale update. Yeah, we're hoping some more. We're mostly in to 6 to 7, that kind of range is what we're shooting for most of the time.
And Commissioner Porter, were you asking about the TSPs or the scenario plans? You were asking about the TSPs?
Actually, good point, Chair. Thank you. I would say for either one. I mean, what I was kind of hoping to get would be the incremental increase associated with this rule, but I don't, as you mentioned, it's kind of hard to bifurcate that a little bit, but yeah.
The scenario plans, that's the new requirement. The TSP was already a requirement that was there, correct?
Chair Lazo, correct. So we have some additional pieces of TSPs. So like I said, it's hard to say, how much are the new rules actually costing in terms of updated TSPs. There's a chunk of it where we're requiring some more detailed inventory work that maybe some folks had done before. ODOT is paying for a separate project to do inventory across the state kind of in bulk. So there's a cost that's there that's helping support a number of jurisdictions that they don't have to take on themselves. So it's a little bit hard to say how much each city is. And then, like I said, prices are just up everywhere anyway.
It'd be very interesting information to get if there's any way to get it.
Deputy Director Green.
Thank you, Chair Lazo. Vice Chair Boyer, Matt may have been able to get, Matt, I may be interrupting Matt here, but the state has also invested funds to help the jurisdictions come up to date. So we could certainly revisit to the fiscal impact statement that was associated with the passage of the rules. It'd be interesting to do a backcasting on that, but we're very fortunate that the state provided $3.7 million associated with the implementation of these rules that the team has been managing successfully to help all these plans be accomplished. And then ODOT is bringing additional millions to updating the TSP. So we could provide that information perhaps in a future director's report if you wish. Thank you.
I just wanted to comment if I could on this, is to
yeah.
say there is a financial cost, but we are also keenly aware of the time that it takes for local governments. And we do hear that local governments have a lot of requirements coming on them, and we want to be always aware of putting more requirements on their time for the local staff. And so I think in some of what we're doing in this we're proposing here is try to cut some of that back in some cases.
Well, Mr. Carl, thank you, because that was my first concern was administrative burden. And I'm delighted to hear that you're looking at how to ease that administrative burden. I think that's significant. As I sit here as a rural commissioner, I'm delighted that there is in the metropolitan areas this planning to reduce greenhouse gases. I'm also aware of the air pollution produced by forest fires, wildfires. And I think to myself, the money that we spend on doing all of this planning, if we applied it to reducing the risk of wildfire by doing silvicultural management, that's a trade-off in my mind, because if the intention is clean air, which is what we want for healthy people and a healthy planet and a healthy economy, how do we best achieve it? I don't expect to answer that question now, but that's the kind of thought process I have for big picture, which takes me over to the governor's executive orders. I see that as very hopeful, because what it does is to unsilo the state agencies and look at these big picture issues. So I'm heartened by all of that. Thank you.
Mr. Bennett.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for the work here. And I'm certain this probably isn't the right place to put a place mark, but I really want to raise the issue. It took me 8 hours to drive yesterday to get to be here today. And when you think about the exhaust for 8 hours of driving and the lost time, we do a lot of work on our metropolitan areas, but we still are not addressing how rural Oregon and my 18 counties can get to other places without burning inordinate amounts of fossil fuel. And as I said, this is probably the wrong venue, but I really want the issue always out there in front of you. And maybe this is a Department of Transportation Commission point, but we do lip service to rail and do nothing. And so I look at the roads just jammed with people yesterday, struggling through the snow, thinking all these folks are contributing to greenhouse gas. And if there were alternatives, I'm sure a large portion of them would do that. And so once again, I appreciate and recognize the work here, and I recognize the parameters of this work, but I really would just ask that you keep to your attention and to the other appropriate organizations' attention so that we really start to do something to provide other alternatives as gas. You know, I was in John Day, gas was $5 a gallon. And actually some place else that I went, it was $5.25 a gallon. So we have an economic issue here because things are astronomical, but we also have just our air quality and the transportation and lost time for productivity when everybody has to struggle where, you know, when we did have Amtrak, while it was kind of an adventure to go from Baker City to get here, you eventually got here, but you could be doing work and you would be rested up eventually as you got to look at, and, you know, so I realize once again that I'm not tasking you with this. I'm just asking that you realize that for the 18 counties that I am the spokesperson for, they would like to have other alternatives, especially as we see the Deschutes County, Prineville Metroplex developing there. You know, I look at it and think, what are we doing? Yes, Redmond Airport is going full and the jets are taking off with big black streams as I was stuck there in traffic. But what are we going to do to move the people on the ground in a positive manner that doesn't add to the greenhouse gas? So, and I realize that's a big task, but thank you for the work, and thank you for the work in the Deschutes, Prineville metro area, Redmond, et cetera. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Duly noted. Yeah, Bill and Matt, going to proceed to the scope of what we're headed for here.
Certainly, thank you. So 4 pieces that we've identified as part of this rulemaking scope and listed here, and I'm going to go after kind of the biggest one first, which is Rule 210 in the TPR. We had, as part of that kind of second phase of the rulemaking in 2023, had a pretty big discussion with our advisory committee, and we even had a subcommittee that met a few times just about this rule and kind of where we wanted to go with it. We knew it wasn't, the way it was written was not right, that we wanted to do something different, and all the parties essentially agreed with us on that. What we couldn't agree is like what it should actually look like. And so the commission at that time decided to defer a decision. We were running out of time in that rulemaking process to be able to really sit down and have a discussion about that. So the commission said, let's keep it written as is. Everyone agrees we're not going to actually implement this as written, but we'll just say it doesn't come into effect until the end of 2027. In the future sometime, we'll figure that out. Welcome to the future, everybody. Here we are. We're next year, end of next year is when this rule would come into play. And like I said, the rule as written is not something that anyone, I think, really intended it to kind of continue as. So the rule itself is pretty short, but it has broad effects. Kind of the middle part of the rule sets kind of some basic requirements for how transportation models or transportation analysis should work. And then kind of the last section of the rule requires that land use decisions individually show that making that decision would not show an increase in vehicle miles traveled per capita. So we're trying to reduce vehicle miles traveled per capita, and so that sounds like a good thing, right? Well, let's get a little bit in the details about that. The rule itself, I went back when we were thinking about this rulemaking and looked at some of the early drafts in the 2020, 2021, 2022 timeframe. It wasn't always Rule 1010. We numbered the rules back and forth, changed them around a little bit, but we tracked down the early versions of this rule. And there was a lot more in there. What happened is we went through that rulemaking process. The main kind of pieces of that rule made it into other parts of the division, so made it into other parts of the TPR. And a lot of the elements that we thought were important are in other rules, and they are working. So what we've come to the conclusion as, and we've talked closely with our partners at the Department of Transportation of this as well, and of course everyone here at DLCD, that as drafted, the rule, the requirements are either just not needed, they're not necessary, and or they have unintended consequences that could be harmful to what we're trying to do. So let's talk about the kind of the unneeded pieces. That's sections 2 through 4 of the rule. Just say, hey, a transportation model should be consistent with your plan and should follow regular standard. There's nothing in there that's required for a local jurisdiction to understand how to operate a transportation model or how to do transportation analysis. It's all pretty basic stuff. If you look back at some of the earlier versions of the rule, what I think we may have been trying to get at is to do something which you shouldn't do, which is to try to make the model have an outcome which we're trying to achieve, which the models, that's not how they really work. They're trying to say, what's our best guess about what the future would happen if we did this or that or the other thing? So if you're trying to manipulate that on the back end, that's not necessarily helpful for trying to tell you what the future is. No model is perfect, and every model is wrong. We know that because no one's got a crystal ball. We don't know what the future is going to look like, but you want to make reasonable fact-based assumptions about the future when you're trying to figure out what changes we're going to make are. So in the end, the rule doesn't really say that, but that's, I think, why we had some of these pieces of the rule in there, is because that's some of the things we were trying to do. So we've talked with the modelers at the Transportation Planning Analysis Unit at ODOT. They're like, well, this is the stuff we do anyway. No one doesn't do these things. So those sections just aren't necessary. They're just kind of vestigial. Kind of the bigger problem, frankly, it wouldn't be bad to keep those things, but the bigger problem is Section 5, which has some pretty significant unintended consequences potentially, and really was the linchpin of the discussion in 2023. The rule, it applies to land use decisions that use a transportation model or analysis as part of making that decision, which could be a lot of decisions, a lot of land use decisions. And what it does, it says we require that model show that there's a reduction in VMT per capita. Now, like I said before, some of that was like, is the model right in showing us what the future looks like? But also, is this a land use decision that will actually potentially increase VMT per capita? So the problem is that an individual land use decision might increase VMT per capita, and it might still be okay and good for that land use decision to move forward. And I'll talk a little bit about that. You have potentially, for example, a land within the urban growth boundary that's near the edge of the community that is planned or being planned for housing development. You might maybe want to zone it to allow some more housing, some more dense housing, all the kinds of things that we're trying to accomplish in this state. Because of its location in the community, folks there may drive more than the average person in the community because it's near the edge. They may take longer trips in cars than the average person in the community because they have longer distances to go. That could increase the VMT per capita, even though that's a development that we know is wanted and desired. So that's a problem. What we really have tried to focus on with the other rules that we have is looking at it at a system-wide, right? As an average across the entire community. We can increase VMT at the edge potentially, right? We can add more folks into a new neighborhood on the edge of our community. We can make investments there to make sure that those folks have as many choices as possible. There still may be people driving more miles there per person than people in the center of the community. That can be balanced with land use changes closer to the edge of the center of the community. And when I say center and edge, it doesn't, I mean, every community is going to be a little bit different about what goes where and have, and it's not necessarily the edge and the center, but folks in more transportation efficient areas of the community, we may make some more land use investments there or transportation system investments there to lower the VMT in those areas. And across the entire community, you have a reduction. That's what we're shooting for. When you start looking at these individual things, first of all, I mean, like I said, it's difficult to actually make that work. There's going to be a range of folks in the community that have a range of needs. And so some of them are going to drive more and some of them are going to drive less. And that's just how it is. The other thing is just the technical side of trying to figure that out. We've done a lot of work trying to get at the VMT per capita numbers for the system-wide, and it's trickier than you think. And trying to get down at those finer grains is just more and more difficult, more and more uncertainty, more and more assumptions built on assumptions that makes it really difficult to say, oh, this number's coming out rooted in reality or not. So the larger scale we can operate at in terms of looking at those numbers, the better. So I just want to list here, these are some other rules that exist that are implemented that are, you know, in play today that local jurisdictions are considering and thinking about when they're making decisions across their community that require VMT per capita reduction. Like I said earlier, those 210 had some of these things, they kind of migrated into some of these other rules. This isn't an exhaustive list, but these are some other rules that do have those. So I want to make sure that, yeah, I believe that's the end of my discussion on Rule 210. This is kind of the biggest piece of what we're talking about. So I do want to pause here and ask the chair if there's any questions.
Thanks, Bill. Commissioners, any questions about the first part of the charge to repeal Rule 210? Nobody. I have a couple questions.
Okay.
I guess I'm curious about the language we're using around repealing. So is the charge to the RAC to simply just repeal the rule, or is it to evaluate it, to repeal it, evaluate it, and then replace it with pieces of that might still be pertinent? So again, if, for instance, if the problem with Section 5 is it has this conflict around specifically land use decisions, couldn't we revise that language in a way that removed that conflict? Or is it just, and then there are other parts of the rule that you said that are just aren't necessary, so those could be repealed. But there are some elements of it that might be useful to keep in. So is the charge simply, again, for the RAC to say that whole piece is gone and then move on? Or will they sort of evaluate if there are pieces that need to be kept and how it relates to the other rules that you've talked about?
Chair Lazo, thank you for the question. The recommendation of staff is for the commission to direct the repeal, just get rid of it. We discussed in detail over a long time, didn't we, Matt, about like what's worth keeping? Should we really get into the weeds on this? Should we really sit down and talk with folks? And the more we talked about it internally, and the more we talked about it with folks at ODOT, we all came to the conclusion, what is it that we are trying to accomplish with this rule? Part of the problem is different people had different ideas about that, and which is, you know, part of the problem is the rule is very kind of short. And so it doesn't, it could mean a lot of different things. Is it really about modeling? Is it really about VMT? What is it really? And so, and it has been about both of those things. And so it was kind of confusing. And when we really thought about what I discussed about the potential impacts, and what are the other things, other parts of the rules doing, we weren't sure what there was left that we could squeeze out of this rule that we weren't already doing somewhere else. The other thing is that if we were to do that process, that I'll talk a little bit about our proposed timeline here, but that's a longer rulemaking process. We're scheduled to do 2 or 3 advisory committees right now. That's more than that process, which isn't, I mean, if the commission wants us to do that, we'll go forward and do that. But it would be a more, we would there'd be a lot more policy discussion and we'd be getting into the weeds. And we're trying to keep this rulemaking overall relatively short and sweet and to the point.
Chair Lazo, I think you've hit upon a careful balancing act we're trying to walk here. On one hand, we want to be completely open that this is our staff recommendation to repeal, so nobody's surprised at the end of the process. But I don't want to presuppose the outcome of a rulemaking advisory committee. It's possible we'll hear from those members that they have different ideas about this. And so we're trying to be open about what we're thinking, but open to thinking differently if we hear different.
Appreciate that, Matt. Okay. Well, okay. Let's, why don't you move on to the other sections? Thank you.
Thank
Or the
you.
other rules.
The second piece is clarifying progress reports per the commission. So some of you may remember, I was going to say last year, but I'm not sure exactly when it came to you. I'm trying to remember. I think it was in early 2025 when it came to the commission. But Metro submitted a major progress report in 2024. The progress report showed that, like I said earlier, Metro's had this scenario plan for a number of years now. So this is one of their regular reports that they come back. It showed that they had not met all their performance targets. That's expected. They're ambitious targets we're trying to get to. But when they don't meet their performance targets, the thing they need to show us is how are they going to get there? So they need to show us corrective actions to address those missed targets. They had, I forget exactly how many targets that were missed, a dozen or so. They have lots of targets, just to be real clear, but they had about maybe a dozen-ish or targets or so that had been missed. And they had a set of 10 corrective actions that were kind of broad and multiple actions addressed multiple targets. It all made total sense. There wasn't anything wrong about it. But what we heard from you, from the commission, was we want this target to have corrective actions. We want this target to have corrective actions. We want this target to have corrective actions. We want each target to have specific corrective actions that are connected to them. The rule is very general. It just says have corrective actions. It doesn't say have to be specific. It doesn't say they must be broad, but that's how Metro chose to do it. So that's what we heard from you, and that's what we've been providing guidance to folks if they're going to do that work, which we haven't had anyone had to do that yet. Would do that, but that's just a guidance. What the change in the rule would do, we recommend, is just make a small amendment to say those corrective actions should be for each specific mixed target. That's because you asked us to maybe do that. So that's all. Any questions about that? So our third thing is to eliminate redundant reporting for Metro. So like I just talked about, you reviewed a report from Metro, the major report that came from them, and that's when that last thing we talked about came out of. You may also remember, if you were here, right after you reviewed that, you sat down and you had Metro come up again and give you another report, which was very similar to the first report you had just heard. So for over a decade now, when the commission adopted rules about adopting their scenario plan, you also said in Division 44 on that left-hand column there, you said you also need to report to us regularly about how you're doing, and this just applies to Metro. So then a decade later, 2022, have rules that apply across all 8 metropolitan areas. You adopted a rule that said we're going in the transportation planning rules in Division 12 on that right-hand column there that says we want regular reporting from all 8 metropolitan areas, Metro, and then all cities and counties in those other metropolitan areas. So, but at the same time, we kept that other one in Division 44. So basically right now, Metro does the same thing twice. Which is very similar. So here's a little bit of the kind of differences between them. In Division 44, Metro has to report on progress towards implementing that scenario and how they're doing on performance measures. In Division 12, they report on how they're doing across those both regional and local performance measures. Same set of performance measures when it comes to Metro that they're reporting on, although Metro also has the responsibility to report on behalf of cities and counties a little bit more in detail in Division 12. There's some review differences as well in Division 44. That commission always reviews that report. And then you define whether or not they're making satisfactory progress or need additional corrective actions. The review process in Division 12, the department will review that report and the director will make a decision either to approve that or refer it to you. And then appeals can come to you. And that's what happened with Metro, is that the department had approved that report and then it was appealed to you and you heard it. And then we brought that to you at the same time as that other one. So it was a little bit confusing to you, I think, a little bit confusing to Metro, a little bit confusing to us. It doesn't really help anything. So we've recommended that we eliminate that redundant reporting requirement in Division 44. We're going to keep the reporting requirement in Division 12 as is, just because similar content, slightly different review processes. It was getting confusing and unnecessary. Any questions about that? All right, thank you. So we are into the small corrections. So while the last 3 or 4 years, staff has been keeping a list of things that we found or that someone else found and and let us know about, of little things we need to change. We went through that with kind of a fine-tooth comb and took out the ones that were relatively small and don't need. I have proposed language for all of them right now. There's nothing where there's like a question of like, well, what's the right policy here, things like that. We need to have a discussion about. We're going to have a discussion at the advisory committee about each of these things, but they shouldn't raise huge questions. This is about making sure that we're using consistent terms, that we have some slight wording changes. There's a few numbering errors. There's one place where when we filed the rule, we accidentally included language that described what the rule was in the rule instead of being, there's what this rule does, then there's the rule. Well, actually some of the language got in the rule. It doesn't really change anything. It's harmless in that context, but it shouldn't be there. So we're going to remove that. And then while we're in there, if we do have some updated references to statutes, we'll make sure to follow up with council on that and make sure that we're all up to date there. A few changes that the commission has made to Division 8 recently are the housing rules, as you know, of course. There's some references in Division 12 about that, and so we're going to update those references while we're in there as well. So that's basically it, and we put a whole long list in the staff report, and any questions, happy to answer those. Okay.
Thanks.
So let's talk a little bit about the process then. We are going to have a rulemaking advisory committee. We'll be sending out an invitation shortly to the members of the RAC from our previous rulemakings that happened in the 2020 to 2023 process. So I just want to remind the commission that we had very large committees that represented intentionally many interests and backgrounds. So our intent is to cast the wide net again, see who we get that would like to volunteer for this. Because of the nature of the work that we're doing, I'm not necessarily expecting like tons of people to come back and say that they want to join, but we'll see what happens. And if we need to fill gaps, then we can identify where those gaps are in terms of geographic or interests coverage, and invite other folks in to join. That's our proposal for the advisory committee membership. And then for the time frame.
I have a question.
Oh, certainly, yes.
On the makeup of that RAC.
Yeah.
So are you only going to be looking for people within these jurisdictions to be on the RAC, or is there thought process of maybe people on the fringe of these rules might affect in the near future?
So Chair Lazo, Vice Chair Boyer, our plan was to focus on the metropolitan areas, correct?
I see. Okay.
There's, I think 1 or 2 of the small corrections which apply to definitions that apply statewide, but I mean, it's real little stuff. Yeah.
Chair Lazo, forgive me if I may. Thank you, Chair Lazo and Vice Chair Boyer. Just want to add to that part of I take your, I might be imagining your point, but cities do peak over, or the edge might change at some point as metropolitan areas are redrawn. staff do invite the League of Oregon Cities to participate, so they should hopefully be keeping a broad look at who all should be involved and also apprise if they're about to get scooped into the program by population growth. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Director and Chair Lazo, Vice Chair Boyer. If I might just talk a little bit more broadly about that process. Every 10 years, the census occurs. Following that process, the census does some work to determine what they call urbanized areas. They keep it interesting by changing how they do that every 10 years. They have a different methodology. So we never really know exactly what's going to happen. People guess about, oh, this city will come in, this city will be, whatever. But we just don't know until the census figures out after 2030 what their methodology is going to be, and then actually do that process. And then they'll tell the FHWA, which then determines what's in the metropolitan area. It's a kind of convoluted process. So it wouldn't be until 2033 or so probably that the next jurisdictions would know. Our rules are built to jurisdictions that are either in a new metropolitan area, if a new one is formed, or added to one that already exists, have basically a grace period, and they can have exemptions given to them for a number of years before they have to even do anything. So we really try to account for that in the process overall. And that's not changing with these proposed rules at all. All right, so the process, we expect to, if the commission directs us to initiate the rulemaking today, we'll convene the RAC this spring, get it together, hold 2 RAC meetings this summer. The first one will really lay out all the proposals that the staff has put together, discuss those, have a second meeting where we can kind of wrap that discussion up, talk about all the different rulemaking procedural things that need to happen, impact statements and things like that, in preparation for a hearing. So you would have a public hearing in October at your meeting this year. We would have a final advisory committee meeting, depending on how that hearing went, after that meeting in late October. And then you would consider adoption at your meeting in February of 2027. Any questions about that time frame or in general, as we're at the end?
Mr. Thompson?
Thank you, Chair. I think it's a gift to discuss transportation planning in a way that is clear and concise. My hope is that the clarity and concision, really the excellence of your presentation this morning, is a reflection of both the administrative burden being eased and the effectiveness of the rules that you're proposing. So I praise you highly, both of you.
Commissioners with questions or concerns at the moment? I think, why don't we go ahead and take public comment, and then we'll have further discussion about a motion. Let's see, I know that we have right now 1 person signed up for public comment that's virtual.
He's not with us.
Oh, well, he's not logged in online. He could not also not be with us, but we're not sure. I don't know.
I'm not finding him online.
Okay, Brock.
I have reached out by email.
Okay. Brock was signed up for public comment. You're not out there, Brock? All right. We will move on from public comment then. Yeah, there is one. If folks didn't see, there was an exhibit that is posted online from the League of Oregon Cities. Any other discussion or comments from commissioners? I guess for my only follow on is this is the charge, and I'm not, having participated in the RAC process and having been on the commission, I'm not sure that we've used language like this in the past so directly. I really appreciate Matt's perspective and providing that. It seems to make sense. I just I'm just hesitant a touch from this position to frame it that way. But one of the things that does help move me forward is that we actually aren't getting public comment about that at this point, right? That there isn't concern that that's how we're going into the process. So I'm inclined to find that to be acceptable at this point, given what staff has told us. So If there's no other discussion or comments, oh,
I do have one other person that signed up for public comment. It initially was not on this agenda item, but this is the item that they would like to speak on,
oh,
and they are available online.
all right. And who is that?
His name is Jonathan Tallman. Let me move him over.
Oh, okay. I see that's down on 16. Okay.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes, my name is Jonathan Tallman, and I'm gonna tell you, I have really big issues with what you guys are speaking on right now. And it has affected me specifically 5 different ways, and it's so layered and it's so frustrating trying to articulate all the points because, I just heard that gentleman speak. It takes a long time to speak of all the layeredness. Well, I only get 3 minutes to speak on all the layeredness, and I feel shut down as far as my freedom of speech on what's happening. And so I would really ask that you read over what I said to Denise. Number one, getting on this meeting is very hard. Okay, it should be way easier than this. I also email Bill, and for some reason, a lot of your guys' emails do not come out correctly, and they always get bounced back. I gave 2 case scenarios of things that are happening with the TSP adoption and also with the Parks Master Plan. But basically, I just want to put it in a nutshell because I don't want to waste your guys' time. But you guys are making decisions that really affect me and really affect me at the ground level on my property rights. But please make sure that this rulemaking protects the public from a planning shell game where future concepts are shown as flexible and aspirational when adopted, but later treated as hard facts. Because right now, the TSP plan that was done and the PMP, they're already implementing the stuff that they said is conceptual. And it's only been weeks later, and I have the meeting notes, meeting minutes, and it's just a shell game that's ridiculous. And I've done a petition for review. I'm still waiting to hear back. I submitted it yesterday. But these are things that they have already been solidified, already have water in place, already have roads in place, but then they only show conceptual. And when you change these rulemaking processes, it affects me on such a level, and it has devalued my property. I wish I wish I had 45 minutes to explain, like the gentleman before me got, explaining how this in a real world scenario affects my property value and affects what I've been doing on the ground level. And I've pleaded for the last 7 to 8 years to someone to listen. And I'm asking you guys to put brakes on what you're doing, because if I had 45 minutes to go through with maps, with corridor plans, with documentation, everything that was there, you guys would say, wait a second, this needs to be overhauled in a way that this doesn't get it done again. And I do have ways that this can be done to show, as well as resoluted, so that everybody wins out of the whole process instead of a bureaucratic game of, well, no one spoke up, so there's nothing we can do. Again, thank you for your time. What you're about to vote on is very important, and it affects me very directly. Thank you for listening.
But thank you. Before you, can you, for the record, can you give us your name and the area you're from, please?
Well, Jonathan Tallman, and I'm from Boardman, Oregon.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate
Yep.
it.
No, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I did hear back from Brock.
Okay.
He is not able to get into the meeting. He had to be removed before we went into exec session, and so now he's unable to join again. But he did want me to convey that Oregon Realtor supports the repeal of 660-012-0210.
Thank you. And then I don't know, is it possible, do we have printed out copies of the Exhibit 1 for the comment that was made on this agenda item at all? For commissioners that, or can we?
Would you like me to put it online? I can do that right now.
Yeah.
It's online.
League of Cities?
You mean share screen? It's
Yeah.
it's posted online, but Denise, you mean share screen? Awesome. Do we print it? Take a break and print. Okay, we'll print it for you.
Yeah, we'll take about a 5-minute break to get copies
Chair.
printed to folks. Yeah.
Well, as the Eastern Oregon representative, I can't, I haven't been, I want to be responsive to the gentleman from
Yes.
Boardman.
Thank you.
However, I can't, I just absolutely don't know and where it's going to impact him. So maybe staff could help us, at least so we can be responsive to him. I think that, you know, we're always a goal one team and, but I'm somewhat at a loss and
Yeah, I think, and I appreciate that, Commissioner Bennett. Thank you. And I think I did want to bring up, and there may be a different discussion that needs to happen, but my sense is that this particular agenda item wouldn't affect that individual because he's not in any of the areas that are impacted by this particular rule. Am I correct in that statement?
Chair Lazo, correct.
So yeah, that discussion might need to happen somewhere else outside of this agenda item.
that was, well, I mean,
Missed something. Or something might have changed in the way they evaluate urban areas while we were here.
Yeah.
All right, so let's take a couple minutes here and then we can get copies of the legal org.
Ingrid just ran up to get them.
They're coming, they're on their way. So give us a couple seconds and then folks can take a look at that. being signaled. Oh. All right. Vice Chair Boyer.
So for the record, can we have who that public comment who couldn't sign back in? I mean, I assume I know who it is, but we didn't hear the full name.
Oh,
I'm working on getting him
Oh.
back into the room.
Okay.
His name is Brock Nation. He's with Oregon Realtors.
Oh. And, okay, so you're gonna try and get him in because I didn't compute what you had said that his comment was.
Chair.
Again, to the league's letter, I appreciate Commissioner Bennett's comments. I agree with those. I love this point about sufficient accounting for the factors that cities cannot control in meeting or missing targets. I love that. I always think it's important to look at what's working and what's not working, because I think it guides not only the present, but the future. And I think we're always adaptively managing to the future. So I hope that that's part of your deliberations as well.
I also think that looking back to our meeting where we were discussing those issues, that everything needs to be always kept in context. There we were attempting, I personally was attempting, and I believe my colleagues for the most part, was attempting to balance the community concerns and community's voice with what was happening and bring a sense of fairness and levelness to it. So whether or not it should be incorporated actually in rulemaking or whether that was for that specific occasion, I think is best left to the RAC and to staff to bring to us so then we can flesh it out. But I think it was so important that that day and at that moment, the action, I didn't look at it honestly as, okay, for the rest of eternity, this is the way it's going to be. It was, we were addressing, there was concerns raised by, and now I know I'm on the edge of senility on some things, but quite frankly, it was addressing in my mind what was raised specifically by public and other entities. So I think as the RAC works through, I would hope that you would start from a neutral spot and not, well, the commission did this, and so that's obviously ultimately what has to happen. We want the best for the transportation plan versus what we did that day. And maybe I'm only speaking for myself, but I believe that as I was looking at my colleagues, that's where we were, and the then chair, that we were trying to, okay, we address your needs, and so it isn't predestined in my mind. Now that's only Mark, so I'm willing to leave it at that. Thank you.
Just checking to see if we're going to have
I've
Brock.
not seen him
Okay.
join yet. I did send him a direct link to see if that would override him not being able to rejoin. But would you like me to repeat his comment? Okay. He stated, Oregon Realtor supports the repeal of 660-012-0210.
First part of that, the kind of the big part of the discussion that Matt talked about. They are in support of the full repeal of that rule. Great. All right, why don't we go ahead and move forward because we're getting towards the end of time. At this point, if there's no further discussion or comments from commissioners, then I would entertain a motion.
Chair, let's see here. The suggested motion, I move that the commission direct the department to begin rulemaking as described in the staff report in attachment A, rulemaking charge, and also as a result of the discussions here today.
Commissioner Bennett has made a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Thompson. All right, Denise, can you call the roll on this vote?
Commissioner Bennett,
Aye.
Commissioner Porter,
Aye.
Commissioner Thompson,
Aye.
Vice Chair Boyer,
Aye.
Chair Lazo.
Aye.
And again, Commissioner Warren is prearranged absent.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Bill. Thank you all. Thank you. for your efforts on this, and we look forward to seeing you all again in October, I guess. All right, we are headed for another break again. So we are taking a break from 10:41 till 11, and we'll come back with the coastal access public hearing rulemaking. See you all then. Thank you.
It had to go through federal consistency review.
Welcome back, everyone. We are ready to move into to item number 4. Surprise, it's only item 4. It feels like a long day already. This is the rulemaking for coastal access, and this is a public hearing. So we'll hear now from Lisa Phipps. Lisa, please introduce your team.
Sure. So thank you very much, Chair Lazo, Vice Chair Boyer, Commissioners. We appreciate the opportunity to be here this morning. This is rather exciting for us. Meg Reed, our Senior Coastal Policy Specialist, will be presenting the rulemaking effort that has been going on since last November. Sorry. Time has no meaning to me these days. Since last November, it's been quite a process to get here, and we are really excited to be able to bring a rule, which will be a new rule under Goal 17 addressing coastal public access. It's an important issue on the coast, and it's certainly important for the rest of Oregon. So I'm going to pass it over to Meg, but I did want to just thank Commissioner Thompson for being your liaison on this rulemaking advisory committee. You know what I was talking about. And the time that she put in, she was there every time, and we really appreciate her input and her support of staff too during that process. So Meg?
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. Chair Lazo, Vice Chair Boyer, members of the Commission. My name is Meg Reed. I'm the Coastal Policy Specialist with DLCD. I also want to extend a thank you to Commissioner Thompson for serving on the Rulemaking Advisory Committee for our rulemaking. It was really great to have her there and have her support. So today I'm going to talk with you a little bit about this rulemaking effort, kind of remind you where we are with the rulemaking effort, which you initiated back in October, talk about the Rulemaking Advisory Committee a little bit, and then get into the draft rules, and then we'll have a public hearing, and the rules will come back to you for your consideration for adoption in the June meeting. So that's what I just said. This is the outline of what we'll talk about today. The map that you see on the right is all of our coastal public access in Oregon's coastal zone. So it actually goes beyond Goal 17, which is what this rulemaking is about, but it covers the entire Oregon shore zone, coastal zone, which is roughly from the crest of the Coast Range out to the edge of our territorial sea, which is 3 nautical miles from the shoreline. So we have thousands of public access points, which is pretty exciting.
Grace, do you know how many?
I think it's over 1,000. I could get you the exact number, but I don't know off the top of my head if I share. Yeah, definitely. Okay, so like I said, we initiated this rulemaking back in October with your initiation, and at that time we had a charge for approval and also a list of interests for the Rulemaking Advisory Committee. So we did have a recruitment for that RAC back in November and appointed the folks who are listed here on this screen. Their organizations or the interests that they represent are listed here. I won't go through all of them, but we had a lot of support. I think we had 48 applications for the RAC come through, and we ended up with about 25 people, including 6 state agencies that are listed here. And good support from our local government partners as well, both cities and counties. We have met 3 times since that time period with the full RAC. We also had 2 smaller meetings just with the local government representatives of the RAC to kind of get more into the nitty-gritty of the rules, since they are the primary ones implementing them. And then we also had 1 meeting with just the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department, as they are a very big part of this rulemaking effort as well, since they have jurisdiction over Oregon's public beach. So this is a refresher on the Rulemaking Advisory Committee charge. It's to develop rules that include definitions, requirements and considerations for a coastal public access program, criteria to maintain and increase coastal public access, more clarity around rights of way that provide public access, and then coordination between local, state, and tribal entities, as well as considerations for equitable public access and protection for cultural areas and coastal resources. We also, based on your feedback at that point, we also included keeping local government capacity constraints in mind when developing these rules and ensuring that we're not overburdening complying with the requirements of the rule. So here's a timeline of where we're at. Like I said, we met in December, January, and February with the RAC. We filed the draft rule on April 1st with the Secretary of State and are here today with our first public hearing. We'll also be holding a geographic hearing in Newport on May 4th. And this is a requirement for any rulemaking that only applies to a specific geographic location. So for this case, it will only apply to the coast. We'll have one final RAC meeting in May so that we can discuss any public comments that have come in as well as any feedback from the commission today. And our public comment period ends on May 14th. And then, as I said, we'll come back to you all in June for consideration of adoption of the rules. So I'll just spend a moment to remind everyone where we are with coastal public access, why we have any authority in this at all. So that all comes from Goal 17, which is our coastal shorelands goal. And that is our goal that relates to the lands that are immediately adjacent to coastal lakes, estuaries, and the ocean shore. I think of this as our working waterfronts goal. It has a lot of protections around the places of the landscape that are unique to being next to coastal waters. So for example, riparian vegetation, as well as our coastal headlands. And then there's also protections for especially suited for water dependent zones. So for example, ports and marinas, seafood processing plants, things that really need access to the shoreline in order to be doing business. So there are protections for that. And then one of the things that's also included is the protection of coastal public access to our coastal shorelands. So here is that provision word for word. It's a fairly short requirement in Goal 17. It's implementation requirement number 6. And I won't read it word for word here, but just wanted to highlight what it kind of is intending to do. One is for local governments to work in coordination with our Oregon Parks and Recreation Department to develop a program to increase public access to coastal shorelands. Then there's provisions around rights of way that provide access and only allowing the vacation of that if you can retain public access across the affected site, and that all sort of public access points that are within a jurisdiction have to be replaced if for some reason they are lost. And the way the goal terms it is if they are sold, exchanged, or transferred. So our rule is really underneath of this requirement. Yeah.
Commissioner Vice Chair Boyer?
So the goal 17, you mentioned coastal lakes. That's an interesting, I never even thought about coastal lakes as part of this. So that was awesome. But how far inland would that go?
Yeah, Chair Lazo, Vice Chair Boyer, thank you for the question. For coastal shorelands, the goal has minimum areas to be included in the coastal shorelands boundary, and it's areas that are subject to flooding, ocean flooding. So I think of those as like the V zone on FEMA flood maps. It's areas of geologic instability where that is derived from the water. It's also riparian vegetation areas of significant wildlife habitat, and the minimum is 100 feet from the ocean shore, as well as 50 feet from a coastal lake or an estuary. And then I think there's a couple other pieces in there too, as well as those areas where there's coastal public access. So it's actually not that far inland. You might think it's a lot broader, and I do believe I think I have a couple maps in here so you can see exactly where it goes on the boundary, because it isn't as probably broad as people might think.
And the coastal lakes are tidally influenced. That's a defining
they have
factor.
to be hydrologically connected to the ocean. Yeah, so these rules are really underneath of these requirements for Goal 17, and they kind of try to stick to this requirement and further clarify it for our local government partners. So I'll get into the draft rule. There is a few sections that are outlined here. We have a purpose, policy, definitions, and applicability, which are all fairly common for rules, and I'll talk through those a little bit. Then the rest of the rule is around reporting, rights of way, and then right now we have a placeholder for replacing access sites, and I'll talk more about why that's a placeholder. And then the last part is the Coastal Public Access Program. So that's a big part of where this rule will be describing requirements. So to start, we have the purpose, policy, definitions, and applicability. As I said, these are fairly straightforward for all rules. And so this one really just sets the stage again to say that this rule is only for implementation requirement 6 of goal 17, which was just on the screen. The policy section was actually kind of a new addition for the rule after discussion with our RAC. And the reason we added this was it helps to kind of make very clear what the policies of Goal 17 are, those basically those 3 ideas that I mentioned before. And they can be very useful for our federal consistency reviews as the Oregon Coastal Management Program. Our federal funder for that, which is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, is the approver of our enforceable policies. And they have criteria of what makes an enforceable policy. And one of them is that you can't, like a lot of our rules says local governments shall do this. That doesn't become an enforceable policy. So these policies that just kind of set out the policy intent can be more useful in a federal consistency review. And there's a lot more detail that I could get into, but I'm going to skip that for now. But just wanted to highlight that's why we added this policy section. Then we have a definition section, which of course, has the terms that are used throughout the rule and what they mean. And then the applicability section is really important to Vice Chair, your point about how far do these lands go into. So the applicability is for any local government that has coastal shorelands identified in their comprehensive plan. So it's all of those, it's for the most part, all of our coastal cities and counties, except for those that are very much further inland and are no longer subject to tidal waters. Then the next piece is the reporting piece. This is also a new section that we added kind of late in the process with the Rulemaking Advisory Committee. This is sort of to mimic the Farm and Forest report that we already have as a requirement for DLCD for our counties. So this would be a requirement for localities with those coastal shorelands to update the department as they are changing their coastal access sites. And those changes would be if a site is lost, whether it's intentionally or unintentionally because of flooding or erosion or a big chronic event, acute event. Then if they add any new sites from their baseline, and then if they improve any of their sites, so meaning they've made accessibility improvements, parking, bathrooms, facilities of that nature to any of their existing sites, they would report that to our agency. And we did have it as a 2-year reporting cycle, but we heard back from our local government partners that they really wanted it to be on a more real-time basis because they don't want to forget the information and they'll have staff turnover and things like that. So they really wanted to be able to tell us that information right away so we can make some changes to the language based on that feedback. And then we would be required as a department to update our inventory. As I mentioned, we do have an inventory. This is a screenshot of the inventory we have, and we update that on a 10-year cycle. And so the information that comes from the local governments could help us with that update process. And it actually would be a really nice benefit of this rulemaking to have the local government inventory and our inventory speak to each other a lot more in real time so that it makes that update process a lot easier for us in the future. So the next section is about rights of way. So very often on our coast, and if you've all been to the coast, you probably have experienced this yourself, there are a lot of road ends that come to the coastline, and that's where you have public access to the water. So rights of way are a very important part of coastal public access. And what's here on the screen is, again, or just a reminder of what Goal 17 already requires. And so what we've found over time, and I mentioned this when we initiated our rulemaking, that this is kind of one of the issues that comes up a lot with our local government partners about what does this mean, especially the provided public access across the affected site is retained. Like, what does that mean? What flexibility is there? What are the sideboards? So we wanted to create some more information on this part in particular. And we have struggled a little bit of what is the best approach. And right now what the draft rule says is that this, any right of way that is to be vacated that is also providing coastal public access, that would need to be a quasi-judicial land use decision. So this would be a new thing. Right now, generally generally those decisions do go to the city council or the board of county commissioners, but not to the planning commission, and they're not land use decisions. So this would be a change, and to add that as a quasi judicial land use decision. We've had mixed feedback on this from the RAC and from local government partners. Some really support this, and some think that it overly complicates the process, especially because the decision becomes appealable to LUBA if they do it as a land use decision. So we've been kind of behind the scenes trying to think about language that kind of gets to the same purpose of this, which is really to have a transparent process for areas that are used for public access, and to have more notice given about these decisions to make sure that people can come and comment on them, because it is really affecting the whole community if they're to be vacated. So we've tried to develop some new language that talks about the criteria for this kind of decision, and whether it becomes a land use decision or not is up to the local government to make that call. But they, either way, they have to meet certain criteria in that decision-making process. So that's something that I'd love all of your feedback on, and hear some other thoughts and ways we can get at that, because that has been something that we've, experimented with and tried to find a good balance for that one. One thing I'll say before I move on is that, again, we have this placeholder section for the replacement of public access sites. We did actually have draft rules on the replacement of sites in our first round of rules and with the Rulemaking Advisory Committee, but we ended up taking them out based on feedback from our local government Rulemaking Advisory Committee members in particular. What they really highlighted to us is that every jurisdiction on the coast is very different, and they have very different geographies and ability to access the shoreline. And so they wanted to retain their autonomy and their creativity in the way in which they might replace a public access site. And we tried to come up with kind of one size fits all criteria, but it was really challenging. And so we took it out, but I left a placeholder there just in case. So again, it's another opportunity I'd appreciate feedback on, and also from the public comment process to see if people feel that we should have a section on that. So that is something to think about. We did make sure to include the policy in the policy section, the piece of the goal that is already in the goal, and so just saying that verbatim, but there could be potentially more. I will just flag that I will talk about it again in the Coastal Public Access Program, that we do talk about replacement site criteria in that, but leave the exact criteria up to the local jurisdiction to decide for replacements. So moving into the Coastal Public Access Program, this is really the biggest part of the rule that we developed. So again, just as a reminder, this is kind of the main piece of the Goal 17 requirement, is that local governments shall work with the Parks and Recreation Department to develop and implement a program to provide increased public access. So this is about that. And I'll just say that from my research and working with local governments, most of them just have this exact thing in their comprehensive plans verbatim. So there hasn't really necessarily been strategic work of what is a program to increase public access. And so this is to help put some sideboards on what that looks like. But I will flag that this part of the rule would only be triggered when a local government does a plan amendment that affects their Goal 17 chapter of their comprehensive plan. So it's essentially a voluntary plan amendment process. When they do go through that process, then these rules would be applied, and they talk about a few different things. One is creating an inventory of coastal public access sites that are in their jurisdiction with a map. Then they would also need to develop comprehensive plan policies and any implementing measures to go along to operationalize the plan. And they're all meant to protect, maintain, and increase their coastal public access sites. So first is an inventory. This is a very big part of our land use planning program in general, right, is to have an inventory of everything that you have. So that would be the first step, is to include all the sites within a city or county boundary, and that would be regardless of ownership. I mean, they're all public access, but meaning they would also include those that might be for state parks or federal lands, because they are providing coastal public access within their jurisdiction. So it's good to have an inventory of all of those. They can use our database as a starting point. Like I said, we have this inventory that we provide and update every 10 years. And so that's a really good starting point. And when we have worked with local governments on this voluntarily, that's the process that we have used before. So they have to have a table and a map of all of their coastal public access sites. Then they are also required to have a description of those access sites. So meaning, is it a physical access site or a visual access site? And then if it's a primary access site or a secondary access site. So a primary access site would be one that has facilities associated with it, like trails, boardwalks, parking lots, bathrooms, signs, things like that. A secondary access site would be one that has no improvements, but is still used for public access. So you can think of those road ends where people just kind of walk down to the beach. There's no improvements there at all. So they have an inventory of those. And then for those that are primary, a description of what those facilities are. And then as a whole, but not for every individual site, they would be required to discuss potential future improvements to increase public access, because again, that's really what the goal is trying to get at, is an increase in public access. And we have defined what does it mean to increase public access as either adding a new site beyond what is already in the jurisdiction. And the other option is to improve what's already there. So if it's an unimproved trail, we could be making improvements to it, like a more robust trail with a boardwalk or something like that, parking, bathroom, signage, those kinds of things, because that means that more people could potentially utilize those sites if they had mobility issues or they didn't know about it or things like that. So there's an increased value there.
Vice Chair Boyer.
So this really doesn't pertain to land use, but I'm curious, during that discussion about improvement in access, was the new recreational immunity brought up at all by any of these jurisdictions?
Yeah, Chair Lazo, Vice Chair Boyer, thank you for the question. We did talk about it a little bit. The recreational immunity did kind of get resolved during the last legislative session. So there had been some concerns from local governments about liability for areas that are improved for not maintaining those areas, but that got resolved in the last legislative session. And so they don't have that same liability concern.
As long as they opt out or opt in.
Yes, thank you. Surprisingly, they actually didn't really bring it up very much, which is sort of surprising. Yeah. Okay, so here's the map. Like I mentioned before, I wanted to share a map of what this could look like. And so
Can we
this.
pause for a second? I
Oh,
think
yeah.
Commissioner Bennett has a question that might be.
Yeah.
As someone that tries to put some kind of quantification on this, you keep using the term increase public access. And I can see that if I was a jurisdiction in some areas, well, like Bandon, there's one type of a challenge. But if you're down on the southern coast and you're that county or city, what does that look like? I mean, you keep saying, okay, we're going to increase public access, but is a county going to be saddled with it? Or you said improve it. And I guess I'm trying to figure out where are we going with it. It's kind of in the east side, we hear the term, we need to have more wilderness. How much, why, for what reason? And so if nobody's going there now, but you're some county down there in the southern border, okay, now we got to do all of this stuff, but it's not our biggest need. Not having been on the RAC, I'm going to defer to my colleague here, but I'm trying to figure it out. What do you mean? And how are we going to measure it? And is it going to be by a number of citizens that want to go there? I mean, we're continually on the east side. We need to have more wilderness. Well, we've got a lot of wilderness and nobody's going there now. And it's going to impact the county and the local folks, but somebody wants it, but nobody's using it. And so are we just locking it up? In this case would be the inverse. We're just going to make trails out there that nobody goes on, and it's maybe not. And I'm guessing along the southern coast, there's a lot of private ground there. And so how is that going to be addressed? I'm just trying to put it all together in my head and understand it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Lazo and Commissioner Bennett. Thank you for the question. I will get to sort of how to operationalize this idea in the next couple of slides. Yeah, but it's a great point. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why we wanted to keep it from being overly prescriptive, recognizing that every jurisdiction is different and they have lots of constraints for why public access might not make sense in certain areas because it's dangerous and there's geography issues and it would, to put a staircase down a bluff would be potentially $1 million or something like that. So does that actually make sense? And there's lots of access nearby. So I think that does really make sense. And one of the pieces of the policy part of this inventory would be to create a baseline and a goal for improvement. And maybe that's not adding new sites at all. It's just making those that are there more accessible. So that can be up to every jurisdiction to make that call. But if I don't answer your question when I get there, please let me know. So this example here is from the city of Bandon, where we recently did this project with them on a voluntary basis, and they got their sites from our database inventory, and they improved it with local knowledge, and they made this map, which has both developed and undeveloped sites, which again goes back to that primary and secondary access sites. And then they have a table, and they list the facilities and amenities at these sites, and that has been now adopted into their comprehensive plan. And then they have comprehensive plan policies and code that go along with that. To Commissioner Bennett's question, how do we make this work in progress? It's just a map otherwise. So part of the rule says that you must adopt implementing policies and measures with the map and the inventory. And there's some minimum policies to be addressed. And one of that is that public access shall not be blocked. So we do see on occasion where people who might live next door to a public access point put up a no trespassing sign or block it with a gate or something like that, even though it is truly a public access point. So that would be kind of on the enforcement side of the local government to ensure those public access sites remain public. Then there's policies to avoid or minimize impacts. So again, not every place needs to have coastal public access. That might be because it's dangerous. There might be sensitive cultural areas there or coastal resource areas. So those can be in part of this program. This is where I get to that point that I mentioned before, which is criteria to replace sites that are lost. So if they are going through with this coastal public access program, that is a piece that they would need to come up with criteria that makes sense for their jurisdiction. How to increase public access. And this is a difficult one because it's what's in the goal language itself is this idea of increased public access. So we can't really get away from that. So just trying to be flexible about what it means to be increasing public access, but giving that to each jurisdiction to kind of come up with what makes sense for them. Maintenance planning is a big piece of that as well. So coming up with, and that could be, doesn't have to be in the comprehensive plan. It could be in the capital improvements plan, transportation system plan, other places where maintenance and that kind of thing would be anyway. And then the last piece is that it must have an update timeline. And we have minimally, it has to be every 10 years to match the inventory update that DLCD does as well. The other piece is that while developing this program, the local government must be in coordination with other entities, including the tribal governments that are interested in their lands. And that language actually mimics the cultural areas Goal 5 rule language that was just adopted recently. So it's going to the Legislative Commission on Indian Services for a list of the tribes that are interested in each of the jurisdictions, so they can use that same list. And then with state agencies, including the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department, Department of State Lands, Department of Fish and Wildlife, the State Historic Preservation Office, and then others as relevant or applicable. And then the last piece is for us as a department to update our database following the local government's adoption of this public access program so that we are reflecting the most accurate public access sites in our inventory as well. So I did want to share an example of what this looks like in practice. We've actually done this with some local governments. The city of Bandon is one that we did it with that I mentioned already, but we also have done this with Clatsop County, where they adopted a map and an inventory of their coastal public access sites and then associated comprehensive plan policies with that, which I just show screenshots of here. And just as a reminder, we did publish this coastal public access guide for local government planners a couple of years ago, and that has model comprehensive plan policies in it. So they would be able to start from that in their implementation if they were to choose to go down this road. So they're not starting from nothing, but again, it kind of gives them the flexibility to do the policies that make sense for them. So like all rulemakings, we have impact statements that are required to go along with it. We did enlist the services of a consultant to help with these impact statements. So the housing impact statement and racial equity statement, both for the most part, there was no expected impact for those. So no impact to the cost of development of a 1,200 square foot home on a 6,000 square foot lot, which is the requirement of the housing impact statement. And then for racial equity, there's not expected to negatively impact racial equity and equitable outcomes or have an impact on disparities between racial groups. The full impact statements are in your packets for each of those. I did want to spend some time on the fiscal impacts though, because we do expect there to be some for local governments in particular. So the things that would apply right away on the rules becoming effective would be the reporting requirement. Like I mentioned before, if there's changes to their coastal access sites, they would be needing to report that to our department. Then adding the rights of way vacation as a quasi judicial land use decision or something similar if we change that language. And then only when triggered, there would be the cost of developing the coastal public access program. And then whatever is sort of in that program would potentially have some costs. So like the maintenance of sites, replacement of sites, and improvements over time. And I'll just emphasize again that those would only come into play if the local government chooses to do a plan amendment on those topics. For tribal governments, we expect there to be a fiscal impact with the coordination on the coastal public access development when a local government in their area is going through with that. And the same would be true for our state agency partners coordinating on the coastal public access program development. And then there's also a piece, which I forgot to mention, is that they are also required to notify local governments if they are doing a vacation of a right-of-way that is used for coastal public access. So like think of Department of Transportation or Parks and Rec, they would potentially be those landowners or rights-of-way owners that might vacate. And then just generally coordination between state agencies and local governments when they have overlapping jurisdiction. So this is in particular on the ocean shore where the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department has jurisdiction at the statutory vegetation line. So just to summarize.
Sure, Bennett.
It struck me, first of all, I want to clearly understand the county or city can opt in or opt out. So it's, if they decide to opt out, then it just maintains business the way they've been doing it, whatever they're doing it. Okay. I guess that's the nicest one, but I was just thinking that if a landowner wants to vacate it because say there's just a lot of trespassing and trash and everything else, then at that point, currently they would probably go to the council or the commission and apply. It wouldn't cost them anything. But if once we move into the quasi judicial land use, the planning department's now going to charge. And if it gets appealed, they're going to say, I mean, at least most of the counties I'm familiar with and having been a planning director, yep, we'll appeal it, but you pay for the whole thing. So now attorneys and everything else. So we potentially there is a fairly large significant cost there. So I was just trying to understand, but it is optional, and I presume like your county's opted in, but other counties might not. I just want to understand it clearly, and not that I have even an opinion onto it, or just as long as I understand it. Thank you.
Commissioner Thompson.
Thank you.
Answer.
What a joy it was to be part of this RAC, all the ocean people coming together, just working smoothly. There's a dynamic tension, I think, that we were seeking to harmonize and balance between protecting and sharing. And as my colleague, Commissioner Bennett, points out, people do come and behave badly. Some people come and they clean up trash. Some people come and you can't tell they've been there. And some people come and they drop their dirty diapers and they burn garbage and they leave plastic. And I mean, the list goes on and on. Besides that, they make noise. And one of the things that's most concerning to me is they build fires. People just gotta have a beach fire. That's a problem. That's a problem. And that vegetation line, we could tell stories, but we won't. People don't know or don't care or refuse to honor the vegetation line, the constraints on it. So how do we monitor and force potential or actual damage is wrapped up in this. We mentioned it, we talked some about it. There are things that we could do within the purview of this RAC and this rule. There are other things that are outside it. I'm so impressed with staff's ability to develop creative, effective alternatives that said, well, we could have an FAQ section. If you have an issue with this, take it over here because these are the people who deal with it. So we didn't ignore it, but we honored the scope of our authority. Thank you.
Anything else to add to that, Meg or Lisa?
Chair Lazo and Commissioner Bennett, thank you for those comments. I think it's a very important one. And so I'll just talk a little bit about the summary slide because I think it helps maybe get at your question, which is, what is impacting local governments right now with this rule and what is that cost versus what would come if they opted in. So we have not yet established an effective date for the rule. That's been something of discussion, and we know that there's a lot going on with local governments, especially from our department, so we didn't want to overwhelm. So we have considered an effective date of July 1, 2027, which would give them about a 6-month period after some other rules of ours become effective on January 1st. But we're open to discussion on that. The rights of way decision as potentially a quasi-judicial land use decision or some sort of public decision would be an immediate requirement. So that could potentially have a cost depending on how local governments do handle those decisions. Some of them actually do already have that as a decision point. The city of Astoria, for example, actually does that already, but others would not. They aren't doing that, so it would be a change. So I'd appreciate feedback on potentially other ways of still having that be a public comment opportunity and be a transparent decision while also not being overly burdensome to local governments. The reporting requirement is an immediate requirement. That actually the suggestion came from local governments on doing that reporting, and then that they wanted to report on that more in real time. So I feel pretty confident that they're supporting of that requirement. And that actually, I didn't mention this, but that was sort of a compromised approach that we came up with for the replacement piece of the rule that we got rid of because of the complexities with that. But this would at least be a way for everyone to understand what's happening and what's changing. And it doesn't happen very often. These sites don't get lost, every day. It might be a couple a year that are being replaced in a different way. The same with the vacation of rights of way. They're not happening all the time, but it might come up a few times a year. And then the Coastal Public Access Program is only applicable when a plan amendment is initiated that impacts Goal 17. So that is a voluntary process, and it would, be something that the local governments would opt into or not. We tried to make it not so burdensome that nobody would ever do it, but also have the requirements that our RAC felt strongly about having. Okay, so that's all I have for you, but happy to take your questions and feedback, and then also know we have to do a public hearing as well. Thank you.
I'm going to ask a specific question first, and then we'll go to Commissioner Thompson, who is the liaison to this RAC, for some general comments, and then we'll have some more general comments and questions. This is actually a question, if you go back to the slide about the fiscal impacts, I just wanted to confirm, to me, the first section of that about the fiscal impacts on local governments doesn't match what I think is in the staff report. And I just wanted to confirm that because the staff report seemed like it talked only about the voluntary compliance through the kind of the last, the coastal access program piece, right? And not necessarily the immediate implementation of those top pieces. I just want to make sure that I didn't miss something in the staff report.
Yeah, Chair Lazo, thank you for the question. That is kind of an effect of our timelines, right? We were, the fiscal impacts from the consultants came
Okay.
before our draft rules are finished and being posted to the Secretary of State's notice. So we had a little bit of a mismatch on the timeline, and actually the reporting piece only got added after that impact statement we got back from the consultant. So it doesn't say that, and we'll make sure it does for the June staff report. That might be true of the rights of way vacation as well, or maybe that was in there.
I think it's that whole first section.
Okay.
I think but as I read it, was the only piece was the
Voluntary
Voluntary
compliance.
piece,
Yeah. So thank you for flagging that. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's why there's a mismatch.
I appreciate you bringing that up, though. Thank you. All right, so we'll go to just other general comments, questions, and any other comments that you have, Commissioner Thompson, about the RAC.
It was the best rack I've ever been on, with all due respect to every other rack, because it was about the ocean. And really, staff was excellent. I think what we're seeing is that, again, that dynamic tension between the need that people have to come to the ocean and to be healed, and the asset or detriment, the damage they do knowingly or unknowingly. This is an attempt to be welcoming. It also carries the obligation to make sure that the real cost of the monitoring and the protection is carried out in a way that is fair and equitable. You know, we've seen some changes in the transient occupancy tax. I hope that our staff will keep track of the burden, because there is a burden in having guests. If the department can track those and make some recommendations, because none of the coastal counties are in a financial situation to bear additional costs. So if we can find a way to offset that so that it's appropriately allocated in order to protect, so that we can welcome and share the joy and the healing that happens by being by the ocean, I'm for that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Commissioners, any other questions or comments? No? Okay. I have a couple for you. I want to make sure I'm understanding properly kind of how the programming works overall. In the rules around reporting, and then right of way and replacement. To me, that it seems like it implies that you would have to have an inventory of all the public access points to be able to actually do those things, but that's actually not required until you get to the coastal access program. And am I understanding that right? Or is it kind of like the way we do wetlands, where it's like, if you do a development, it's going to impact, and you think there's a wetland, then you have it surveyed rather than having an overall wetland inventory. So to be able to do the reporting, wouldn't you need an inventory of the access points?
Yes, Chair Lazo, thank you for the question. That is a really good point and something we've struggled with a little bit. And some coastal jurisdictions do have an inventory already, or they have kind of a sense of it. You know, it might not be specifically in the comprehensive plan, but they generally have an idea of what's being used. So I think that would help with particularly, I think, the rights of way vacation. The reporting one, I do think that might be a little bit more of a struggle if they don't have an inventory, because they don't know what they don't know, right? So how do they know if something's being lost?
Yeah.
But I think it's probably would be more clear on an application of, like, if a spot was, especially for the rights of way, I would say it's usually pretty clear that has been used as a public access point. But it is a good point. And yeah, potentially maybe we could add some language around that or try to help them. I mean, they definitely can always use our inventory as a starting point, but if they don't know to look there, they might not have that background. Yeah, it's a
It
good
kind of
point.
speaks to that same concern that we have over and over is, is this going to be an additional burden on a local jurisdiction? Well, if I'm sitting there, I think, oh, I got to report on all my access points. I feel like I have to know them all. But yeah, the other way would be, did anybody come in with a development application that affected an existing right of way that is used as a public access, right? Again, it's kind of the same way we do some wetlands. So
Yeah.
I don't know which. I guess the other piece is you asked kind of two specific pieces around the right of way quasi judicial process and then also the replacement process. So again, I don't know if commissioners have any specific pieces on either of those questions. I don't know that I do, not being from that area, but and the person who has the least amount of coastline,
the least.
Chair Bennett.
Only when the caldera strikes, then we will have it, and you guys will be in your ark. But seriously, as I was thinking about it, if first one thought is that if someone's going to develop something, is this going to be a tool that says, okay, you want to develop X, now you put in a coastal access site? That would be, I'm just kind of thinking out loud. And then the second of all is that I'm a private landowner and I've kind of let people over the years trespass. The road ends, but they go through my thing. And now are we taking and through adverse possession indirectly saying that is now an access? And I didn't really want them, but I just kind of was laid back about it and let them go down there. And I probably I probably wouldn't be terribly comfortable if that was the direction. Either of those, it's kind of, if the government has established, the governing body has established an access site, I think we certainly should keep it. But when we have these ad hoc, just because I pull up and cut through Barb Field and to go fishing all the time, and she doesn't say something that now all of a sudden it's on the coastal access site, that gives me heartburn. I guess that's maybe just me as a landowner, but we do want plenty of access, that please don't get me wrong, and good access too, so that everybody can enjoy our coastline. But we also need to do that delicate dance and balance. And I'm not, as the chair said, I'm a long ways away from any water there.
You're also closest to county planning programs than the rest of us too, though. So, and I guess this doesn't apply to private access as it says here, though. But I mean, are there instances where private property becomes public access that would get swept into this?
Chair Lazo, thank you for the question. I mean, it wouldn't apply to private access points. I think the beach is a unique situation because you have the public beach that has been established by the beach bill. And so there is a recreational easement over the dry sands of the beaches that go to the vegetation line. And then if a right of way goes to that point or even beyond, some of our rights of way actually do go out onto the ocean shore, then that whole area is public, right? That's a public easement. And so it does allow for that public access. I mean, certainly to Commissioner Bennett's point, we've had many trespassing issues come up over the years in public access of people coming really close to people's houses and beyond the vegetation line, or actually maybe not, because the vegetation line might actually be really close to a house and people don't recognize that. So it actually is a public recreational easement. So I think it's a challenge. And I think that's part of why we put in that piece around like not blocking public access. I mean, it's kind of the opposite of, I think, what you're saying about how a private owner can protect their private property versus like where is it appropriate for public access to occur. So I think it's a challenge on the beach because there is such a mixing of those areas already. And it's certainly, I don't think this is going to change anything. It's already occurring. And I don't know if Mr. Shipsey wants to talk about any more from his experience with OPRD, but
I would just say To your question, Commissioner Bennett, nothing in this rulemaking or this project would change laws related to establishing an easement by prescription that the public can do that. This doesn't do that. If something was established by prescription and became a public access point, then it would be added to the inventory. But, this project itself doesn't interfere with the existing law on those type of things, or if you're your example of using somebody's field to cross, them allowing that to do that, then there can't be an easement by prescription established because it's unauthorized, and they enjoy the benefit of Senate Bill 179 and the recreational immunity provisions and stuff. So, but all of this is very interesting but outside the scope of this,
Commissioner Thompson.
This discussion reminds me of the reality that I see on the ground close to me. And that is that there is both erosion from the ocean encroaching, because it's an active ocean, and there's rocks moving and water moving and sand moving. And then the water coming down the hillside is contributing to erosion. And then the neighbor who wants to be a good neighbor but doesn't care about whatever laws exist puts in a stairway, and some of the neighbors are delighted, but then some of the tourists discover it, and some of the neighbors park in the street in such way that they damage their neighbor's property and to keep other tourists from coming. I mean, these things are constantly evolving. So I really like the idea of an annual report, because again, what we have is attention, and we can track the emergence of issues and hopefully come to some remediation, looking for negotiation and financial support from perhaps the tourism industry, she says once more.
I'll say on the specific pieces around I like the concept of the right-of-way piece being a quasi-judicial. I think that the level of impact potential there, I think, is warrants that, and it's being done in places like Astoria. So to me, that seems like it makes sense. I think I'm wondering about the replacement piece, whether or not there might be, if there's a way to look at it in gradients. So there's like type 1, type 2, type 3 that have different processes, so that we're not, pulling, a very minor, replacement or improvement into some process that just doesn't need to be. So that might be one way to think about it. And again, we'd have to have the planning folks sort that out, but that'd be one way to think about it. So there is some process in place for the ones that we know that we do want to check the impacts on. All right. This is a public hearing, and so we want to make sure I think the public hearing is already open, but is there any public comment related to this item?
I have not received any notice of anyone wanting to provide testimony on this agenda item.
Going once? Going twice? All right. We are not taking any other action on this today, so any other discussion or comments from commissioners? Thank you for your participation in that RAC, Commissioner, and thank you, Meg and Lisa, for the work that you all are doing. Appreciate it. And then that gets us to lunch a little, and we will see you again in June. Okay. And the public comment closes on this May 14th. So there is continuing to be opportunities for folks to weigh in on this rules. Thank you. So we are gonna, should we just break early for lunch? Oh.